All right, so I'm Sandra Montes, she, her pronouns. You prefer ella in Spanish. And here I am with Senator Kim Jackson. Do you go Senator Reverend or Reverend Senator? What do you prefer?
I prefer Kim. That's what my mama has called me since day one. Unless I was in trouble, then she called me Kimberly. So let's just go with Kim.
Kim, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I'm just so excited to talk to you, to get to know you, to see you. And if you wouldn't mind just introducing yourself, briefly, and then I'm going to go in and ask you some more questions about that.
Yeah, sure. So I am Reverend Senator Kim Jackson. I happen to live in Atlanta, Georgia right now, but I grew up in rural South Carolina. And so I very much identify as a rural Appalachian Black woman, or Afrolachian, if you will. And right now I serve also in the Georgia State Senate as a senator. Um, and simultaneous to all that, I also have a congregation that I serve called the Church of the Common Ground, which is a church without walls, serving people who live in the streets of Atlanta or on the streets of Atlanta.
Wow, I'm not sure why I missed that. That's amazing. Tell me a little bit about that. How does it, when I see people, of course, I live in New York City and also in Houston, Texas, and there's a huge houseless population, excuse me, there in both places. And the other day I was going to get dessert with my brother and my sister-in-law, and there was a houseless person on the street lying down, and I asked him, he's also a priest, and I asked him, what do we do?
Mm.
So would you just, please just, that as soon as you said that, I would like to know what can we do? What do we do besides praying for them and our own, just or blessing them? And I mean, what do we do?
Yeah, it's so I think I can speak for the context that I'm in, which is Atlanta, right? I don't necessarily know those different communities, but so many of my congregants, they just want to be seen, right? They want to be seen, spoken to, not ignored, and certainly not harassed, right? Unfortunately, there are people who are just outright mean to them, and so um, for so many folks, they just talk about, yeah, it's great if somebody gives me $1, but I hate being brushed by, right? Or like people just stepping over me and not seeing me. And so I think that's a first step. And that's really what we do at Common Ground. So much of the work that we do is seeing people, being in relationship with people, knowing their names, right? A lot of our work is providing hospitality. And so there's nothing, a person knows that you care about them when you know their coffee order, right? Like that is, and so we work really hard to learn people's names and their coffee order, to show that they are human, that they are a brother, a sister, or a sibling, just as everyone else is. But I think that that is really crucial that folks see each other as siblings in Christ.
Yeah, once I heard that, we should always try to find out their names and then, say their names to them if we see them often, because there are people that we see often. And yeah, so I have tried that, but sometimes it just feels like that's not enough, and so thank you so much for that ministry that you have. When I was talking to a few people, when I told them that I was going to be, talking to you, of course, all the excitement of it all, a few of especially the younger people that I was talking to, one of the questions that they had is, how, did she come out? When did that happen?
Mm,
And how was that process? Because especially the people that I am very close to are in that LGBTQI plus rainbow, and it's a question, right? It's a question.
yeah.
And I wonder if you would feel comfortable and to share that with us.
Yeah, sure. So I think it's important to like situate where how I grew up, right? So I grew up in the 90s for the most part in rural South Carolina. To my knowledge, now I'm sure there were some gay people around who just weren't out, but to my knowledge, the very first queer person that I met, I was 18 years old and in college. I did not know anybody as a child who identified in that way. And a lot of that had to do with the context. Like, I grew up really conservative Christian, Black Baptist. I was the president of the FCA. Like, I was, deep, deep into that kind of evangelical world. But also, it was just a small town. And so people weren't out. But hindsight is 2020. I remember very specifically having a crush on a girl that I played basketball with, but not having the language for it because, again, I didn't know anybody. And really, the only thing I'd even heard about gay people was like a few sermons here or there from the pulpit about like homosexuality being wrong. So it wasn't until I got to college. I was in college, met somebody, he was a professor who was out and gay, and I was like, huh, that's interesting. And I realized I was more interested in it than I think most people are. And so, but my sophomore year, I fell in love with my roommate. Her name is Tia, and Tia didn't love me back in that way. And I think for me at the time, I was just like, oh, it's just Tia. Like, I love Tia. Tia's my best friend. Like, I want to spend my life with her. I'm just like, I'm not a lesbian. I'm just like a Tia is, like that was kind of how I framed it. But I began to have conversations then with the diversity officer at my college. I went to Furman University and just began to ask for things to read. I was especially interested in knowing, could I be a Christian and be gay? That was like my kind of big question. And as I was coming of age, this is in the early 2000s, that was a question mark, right? Like, that wasn't, there weren't a lot of examples. And that diversity officer, she worked really hard to come up with materials and resources for me as I began to explore this possibility, that maybe it wasn't just Tia and maybe it was all women. And so, I graduated from college still kind of wrestling and not sure, um, and very much wanting to be straight because I also knew that I was called to ministry. Like, I knew I was called to ministry when I was as young as 8 years old. And so when you put all the things together, right? Like, I'm a woman, that's already like controversial in terms of being in being a pastor. And then I'm saying that I might be gay, I'm Christian. Like, I just was having a hard time putting those things together, until I went to grad school, where I moved to Atlanta, which is this wonderful gay mecca where there are plenty of gay Black folks around who are also serving as Christians, who are serving as clergy, um, and it was the space where I could bloom, right? Like, it was the place where all of the questions that I had about how these things get reconciled, where there were people there who could surround me, who could help me answer that question. And it also helped that I fell in love with a woman who is now my spouse of 15 years. There's, I think until I fell in love for real, I was always still trying to find a way out. Like, I didn't want to be gay. So I was always trying to find a way out, but I fell in love with Trina, and I think that's when that searching stopped, and came out to my parents. They were not happy. They were, in fact, I think heartbroken is probably the language that they would use, right? My parents are extraordinarily um, religious, faithfully deep people, and so I think they were worried about my soul salvation. Like, I mean, I don't think, I know. My dad wrote me a letter, in fact, and said he was concerned that I would go to hell. And so that's been a long journey. My parents and I were quite estranged for about 10 years. And I remember, I don't know, Sandra, if you saw the commercials, but for a long time there were these like commercials that were with gay people where they were saying like it gets better, and I would just say, that's for white people. I had no hope at all that it would get better for me. And I certainly never expected my parents to ever welcome me back in their home. I certainly didn't expect them to welcome my partner, and it has gotten better. So it just took a really long time, but it has gotten better.
Whew. I need to kind of, hold a little space for that. That is, as a parent of an out man, it's hard to think that I would not have accepted my child or had worried about his salvation. And as a person who, never felt like I needed to come out because I could uh date, people without anybody knowing, or, most of the people that I date are cisgender males. Um, but like you said, I was falling like deeply for a woman, and I told my parents, I'm like, hey, this is who I am, and they're like, okay. But again, I was, it was recent, it was a few years ago. So when I felt like it would be something more serious, which nothing happened with that, but but it was just like one of those things, like I don't want anybody to make them feel not welcome and not like they belong. So yeah, well, thank you so much for telling us that story. As you were, talking about your calling into ministry, like you knew since you were 8 years old.
Mhm.
That's amazing. That is such a beautiful thing. I wonder, how did you come to the Episcopal Church? And I read that you were the first out woman in your diocese, correct, to be ordained. So would you just tell me a little bit of that? How did you go from, Baptist and Episcopalian and then ordained?
Yeah. So I know that I felt called to ministry when I was 8 because I wrote it down. And my parents sent me all of my like journals from a child, and I wrote this essay where I said that my childhood dream, or my dream for when I become an adult, is to be a pastor. Um, and so, I had that dream. I articulated it at age 8 and was told that I couldn't do it because I was a girl, and because the pastor was so important in my life, I believed him, of course, right? Like, if father says you can't do something, pastor says you can't do it, you can't do it. And so I believed it until college obviously was just this huge moment for me, right? I went to college, and the college chaplain there actually came up to me, approached me, and said, can I see gifts for ministry in you? And I think you might have a calling to ministry. And I said, no, that's not possible, I'm a girl. And he put me in his car, and he drove me around Greenville, South Carolina. It's not the biggest place in the world, but it was big enough to have women, mostly United Methodist women, who were serving as clergy. And he introduced me to those women so that I could see, right? I could see myself reflected back. And that was compelling, right? It lit that spark, and so, or rekindled that spark that had always been in me. And so I just had to find a church home at that point, right? Like, once I kind of acknowledged that, yeah, like this is where God is calling me, it's now just a matter of finding a congregation, finding a denomination that will receive me as I am. And again, this is in the early 2000s, so I'm coming out around the same time that Gene Robinson is being ordained a bishop, and so that's all over TV. That was my introduction to the Episcopal Church. In the same way I didn't know gay people, I had never heard of the Episcopal Church until he was on the news. um, and I was like, huh, well, that's interesting. Clearly, they will ordain gay people because I'm watching it happen. And so I found an Episcopal church, right? And by that time, I was in Atlanta, and I literally followed the signs that says the Episcopal Church welcomes you, and it had arrows that pointed me to this church. And as I was walking in, there was a lesbian, like a white lesbian couple, holding hands walking in a church. And y'all, I almost lost my mind. I was like, what is happening? Like, this is possible? I mean, it was everything on that day, in that moment, was just so perfect, right? Being greeted by this like lesbian couple, they showed me to my seat, and then I sat there and I watched the liturgy. I didn't know the word liturgy. I just watched it happen. And there was this priest who stood up who looked like Santa Claus to me, actually. Like this Santa Claus dude stands up in all of these vestments, and he starts celebrating what they said it was called the Eucharist, but what I knew was communion. And it felt right. It felt so deeply right in a way that I could never have expected, that I cannot even still to this day fully articulate what made it so. But and especially given the context, like I was raised in a Black Baptist church with a Hammond B3 and Black people. And here I am, age, 22 or whatever, in a very white church with Santa Claus in front of me, wearing clothes that I've never seen, and a big old organ that ain't a Hammond B3. And yet it felt so right. Like the moment of the celebration of the Eucharist, that the lifting up of the bread and of the cup, like there was just something that felt in my soul like I've been here before, or like this is where I was made to be. Um, and so I left that church that Sunday, and I asked my colleagues in seminary, because I was already in seminary. I asked my colleagues like, "Hey, is there a Black Episcopal church?" Um, and they told me where it was, and I went, and here I am. Right. And I came with the calling. I knew I was already in seminary, right? I felt really clear about a call to ministry. And so St. Paul's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, where Bishop Rob Wright, then just Father Rob Wright was, they welcomed me. I said to him, like, hey, I feel called to ministry. And so he sent me through the process. And and it happened. I will say, I will make this like little parenthetical statement as a woman of color. So I like began the process at age 22. I was ordained at age 25. And the night before my ordination to the diaconate, I remember saying to my spiritual director, I, I wonder if I've been tricked. I feel like this has happened like really, really fast. And I don't know if I should trust all of these white people. There's a lot of white people involved in my process. So, but she reassured me. She assured me, no, you are called, and it has been beautiful and right ever since.
Wow, that is amazing. And you're right. I mean, that from my own, background and what I've seen, it doesn't usually happen that fast, especially for people of color, women of
Hmm.
color, queer people of color. So, wow, thank God for every single step that went exactly how it should have gone. Now, of course, another question that I have from, the youth, because they all want
Uh-huh.
to know. Um, and then how did this politics come? Have you always been involved? I know you were an activist also. So how did this happen? All of it.
Yeah, so I feel like honestly, I have been an adult who's been chasing my childhood dreams. Because in the same way that I felt called to ministry at a really young age, I also got really clear that I wanted to be in politics, and actually would have said the word like I feel like God is asking me to be in politics at age 13. So it's a very like clear moment in my life. I'm so grateful for the people who exposed me to the city council at the time, who kind of like lit that fire in me. But the conclusion that I came to at age 13 is a conclusion that I stand with, which was at age 13, I saw the city council sitting there making decisions about which roads were going to be paved in my neighborhood, in my community. And these were roads that were being paved for the first time, right? So, like, what dirt roads would become paved roads. And at 13, I concluded, oh, this is how you make real change in the world. This is how, like, it's through elected politics, it's through policy, right, that you make real change in the world. And I saw that at 13, and I said, look, I don't know where I will be to do this. I don't know the when, and I certainly don't know how to do this, but I know that the what of my life is to make real positive change in the world. And so, Trina will tell you our very first date that we went on, I told her like, "Hey, you should just like, I'm studying to be a pastor, but you should also know I'm going to be a politician too. And you need to have that heads up, and also you need to tell me if you got something in your closet that I don't want to be associated with." you know? So this is just it's been in me. I think that the timing of it has been something that was unbelievable to me. Like I think I imagined I would serve as a priest for the requisite 25, 30 years and then in my retirement run for office. But um, similar to the way that my college chaplain came to me and said, Kim, I see gifts for ministry in you. I had other people in my life who came to me and said, Kim, I think you should run for office. I think you will be good at this. And again, it reaffirmed what I had already known at 13. And for me, this has been the perfect fit, right? So, I work with people who are experiencing homelessness where I do hands-on things with them. I serve them lunches, I wash people's feet, I pray and engage and serve the and with them and beside them, right? And then I go across the street, literally across the street into the Capitol, where I work on issues that hopefully will one day make my job irrelevant, right? Like I am working on big systems issues that um, hopefully will make it so that nobody's sleeping outside. That will make so that my folks will have access to medical treatment and not need it to be receiving it on the side of the road, right? Like that's so for me, these things just play together so perfectly because I'm both downstream and upstream, right? Like when we go into committee meetings and we talk about mental health and the importance of mental health care, um, it's not just a theory for me, right? I have my own story, but I have so many names, so many people that I love who are sleeping outside tonight because they haven't had access to mental health care, and so it just makes it so much more real. And and I think it gives a gravity to my voice that I wouldn't necessarily have because I come with that experience too. So yeah, I am a little black girl from Calvin, South Carolina who had a dream, who had a vision at age 13, and I'm just trying to live it out.
Oh my gosh, that's beautiful. I want to read the book series. That's what I want to do, like, little Kim, and manifesting her life from 8 years
Yeah,
old. I mean, that's amazing. What I keep hearing also is mentorship, right? People around you who took you seriously, like you said, who believed in you and who showed you, it is possible. Look at, these people, look at these opportunities, right? And that's beautiful, and I hope that more of us can be that for other people instead of
yeah,
trying to shut people's dreams down, but to acknowledge and believe with them. That's
yeah.
really great.
Well, and I will say, Sandra, not only did they believe with me, there were times in my life where people believed for me. So like when I came out, I thought my dream of being a politician in the South had died, right? Like I thought the decision to be out as a lesbian was the end of my political career before it even began. And it was other people who knew me and saw me as my full self who said, no, that dream doesn't need to die.
Mm.
You can be elected. And so, and this was one of the examples where I didn't actually have an example. There's literally never been an LGBTQ person in the state Senate. So, like, they couldn't take me to a person and be like, look. But, but people, I mean, somebody actually literally paid to have a poll done in my district before I ran to see how my district would respond to the idea of a Black lesbian who was a clergy person running for office to prove to me
Yeah.
because I had so much doubt. I had so many questions, right? But to prove to me that it was possible. So I'm so very grateful for the people who not only believed in me, but who believed for me when I didn't believe in myself.
That's powerful. Wow, so powerful. As you were talking also, when you said about that there were no other examples, I think how difficult, I mean, at least from the outside looking in, my one of my nieces was born in Georgia, and I just think, oh my goodness, I'm so glad she doesn't live there. With so many things that happen, how how do you do it to keep standing, for change, and then it seems like it just keeps going backwards instead? How do you do it?
Yeah, a couple of things. I said earlier, Atlanta is a Black gay Mecca. And it is. The community here is vast and expansive and continues to expand regardless of Georgia's laws. And so I feel extraordinarily well supported by the not just the Black queer community, but also by the Black or and Christian queer community. Like that's an even more specific group. And so that's been, I think, helpful. And there is something about believing and knowing that you are exactly where God called you to be that that gives me a deeper well than I could have ever made for myself, right? When I was first ordained, probably 2 weeks in or so, I had this kind of experience, this moment where I felt like I was like outside of myself, watching myself, and I could see myself like putting bread into someone's hands, and I saw the soul, and in that moment, it was so clear to me, like this is exactly where I'm supposed to be. I am doing exactly what I'm called to do. Like it was well with my soul. I remember having that experience, right, 2 weeks into ordination, and and the same is true, I think, serving in the Senate. I have stood in the well, like in the pulpit, right? But I've stood in the well on the floor of the Senate, and I've had this moment of seeing myself and knowing that as hard as it is right that this is what God has equipped me for. God has been preparing me for this moment, for this fight, for this journey, since before I was born. And that knowledge, I think, is part of what allows me to keep walking and continuing to do the work. Um, and finally, I will say my wife, I think she understood how hard politics were more than I did because she set up a group of people to pray for me, um, who pray for me every single day of session. And she started that when I was first, whatever they call it, inaugurated, installed. I don't know what it's called, um, sworn in. From the very first day that I was sworn in 3 years ago, Trina has had this group of women who have been praying for me, praying my strength, is what we would say in the Baptist community. And I am so clear that their prayers, my own prayers, this calling that I have, all of that helps me be able to continue to show up every day and do this work.
Wow, that's so everything you're saying, I'm like, oh my God, it is so powerful, and I love it. And I love Trina. I just think that's so wonderful to have a powerful person. I've also read a little bit about her as your wife. I mean, you're like the power couple. I can't even imagine. I mean, she's also, I read that she's also a faith leader.
Yeah,
And so tell us a little bit about that, and how you
yeah,
both, you know, how that also impacts your relationship and the way you go out into the world.
yeah. So Trina is Muslim. She serves as an imam in her community. It's highly unusual for a woman to be an imam in the Muslim tradition. But remember, there was a time where it was highly unusual for a woman to be the priest in the Episcopal tradition. She, I think, is just she's just early in a change that will continue to happen in the Muslim faith. But um, I think because both of us are faith leaders, that is a part of why our marriage works, is because we both understand what it is to care for a congregation, what it is to what is necessary to like replenish your own soul when you are trying to care well for others. um, and we have this common language, so different faiths but same God, right? And so we have this common language and common belief where we're able to pray together. um, I think that I am enhanced spiritually because I have both the Christian traditions and high holidays of the Christian tradition and also the Muslim tradition. So like, Ramadan is a part of my life, right? Like my wife is fasting. And when I was trying to like win her over, when I was just her girlfriend, I totally fasted with her too. um, it, that I think that's what tipped her over and made her say yes, right? But even though I don't necessarily fast, I am with her community, like they read through the Quran every single night. They read a portion of Quran during Ramadan. And so I hear them reading their sacred text, and I get to go to all of their Eid parties where they celebrate what it is to both feast and fast. And so I am enhanced, and Trina comes with me to Holy Week stuff. And so I think we are just like double blessed, I feel like. um, and I think people often ask, like, how does it work? How can a Muslim be with a Christian? Um, and again, for us, it's, two religions, same God. Um, and then the final thing I'll say is that, Trina now is a imam, but she was raised in a Black Pentecostal tradition. And interestingly, like I grew up in South Carolina, she grew up in like deep South Georgia. So really different places, really different accents and ways of being in the world. But we all know, Trina and I both know the same songs. And so when things get really hard, um, Trina will sometimes start an old Black hymn, or sometimes it's me, but we both know those songs. And I will tell you, Sandra, we have sung our way through some of the deepest and hardest times of our lives. And so having that common, it's not having that common language in song, that common, really, it's a shared ancestry, right? Like when we sing those songs, because I mean, we sing these songs that are about Jesus, and Trina's not, she's not down with Jesus in the same way that we are, but she's like, we are tapping into our ancestry and into the deep faith and the resilience and the courage that our ancestors have. And so those songs have propelled us through the hard times, through the lonely times. And so that's actually the magic sauce. That really is. It's the magic sauce that we have this shared music.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I can't. When you said, earlier, when you said it is well with my soul, I mean, I just totally went there. That's my favorite hymn, actually, of all
Yeah.
time. And, it's just, yeah, that shared music, even when you may not have the same, like you said, religion, not same the
Mhm.
religion, but same God. And that brings me to, if it's okay with you to ask, a couple of more questions.
Yeah.
I know I've taken a lot of your time and I'm like, ooh,
No, no, no.
excited.
We're fine. I'm
Good.
happy. This is great.
Thank you. Well, I wonder, how do you take all of this that you shared with us and be able to work with people who may not want you to have any rights?
Mm,
And because for, those of us on the outside, right, it's so easy to be angry about it, to just be like, oh, that's such a jerk or whatever. But we don't have to actually speak with them. We don't have to, be in the same room with them often. So how do you take all that and are able to continue to be, um, I don't know if you consider yourself like in, partnership with them, also with the people who are in the Senate with you, but how do you do that?
yeah, no, it's hard. Let me just start with that. It's hard, but I've worked really intentionally to build relationships with my colleagues who vote differently than I do, to build relationships that are based on friendship, that are based on shared commonality. I live on a farm, and so I talk to the other farmers, right? Like, um, and I've also, it's interesting. I've asked my colleagues, about certain bills that would impact my family, and every single time they're like, "Oh, Kim, this isn't like, we're not trying to attack you." And sometimes, in some ways, it reminds me of like, I don't know if white people ever did this with you, but like when I was a kid growing up, white people would be like, "Oh, we're not talking about those kind. We're not talking about you when we talk about black people. We're talking about other kind of black people." Um, and so that's almost how they respond in the Senate, like, "Oh, we're not trying to take away your rights, Kim. Like, and plus you're already married, so you're fine or whatever." And I hear that, and I think I just try to keep pushing them on it. This year we had a bill that would prevent trans children from being able to receive gender affirming care. It was a long and difficult fight on the floor, and um, I remember being in the ante room, which is like the kind of side room where we drink Coca-Cola because it's Atlanta, um, and having a Republican legislator, slide up beside me and say, "Kim, I don't really understand any. I don't know any transgender people. I don't understand any of this." Um, and so listening to you speak from the well helped me understand more. He still voted the same way, but I have a sneaky suspicion that if he goes to a church where a kid comes out as trans, that he'll know how to talk to them. Um, and that gives me some hope and some courage. Um, I once had a legislator who was trying to pass a bill that would criminalize youth, um, and he didn't that I don't think that was actually his intention really, but I read it and I was like, dude, and I came up to him and I said, listen, like if one of our kids got caught up in this, like we wouldn't want this to happen to our kids, so why are we, trying to do it? And he looked at me, he's like, do you have kids? And I was like, no. And he was like, you and your wife, y'all should have kids. You'd be a good mom. And it's just like conservative, like we don't vote anything like each other, old white man who was looking me in the face and saying, you and your wife should have children. You would be a good mom. And so I think it's those moments that make me able to keep coming back, because I do think that those things make a difference. Building those kinds of relationships matters. Um, and then fundamentally, I'm there and I keep coming back and I keep doing it because of all the little trans kids who came up to the ropes to see me, because of all the trans parents who called and wrote me and said we needed you, right? I do this work because I know that there is somebody out there who actually does need to see themselves reflected back to them in leadership so that they can dream dreams, and I'm that person, right? And so I keep coming back for those folks. I keep coming back because queer folks deserve to have a voice in Georgia Senate. And if it's not going to be me, then I'm gonna stay there until it's somebody else, right? But I think that's the work that I'm called to, quite frankly. And it helps that I was raised in an extraordinarily like multicultural family where well, I still got, uncles that have a sign in their yard that I don't agree with. Um, so it helps in some ways. Again, I think, I was born for this. I was literally born into a family that taught me how to build relationships with people across the political divide.
Mm. And that's huge. And I think that's the same thing for everything, right? To build relationships across so many things. I know in the Episcopal Church, for me at least, I often talk about that, about, racial wise, how we need to have more diversity. I think one of the things that it really stands out to me when you were speaking about this person who told you that they don't know any trans kids. I think that's one of the most important things for us to do as people, to find others who are nothing like us and be able to start relationships, because I feel like then it's a little harder to vote,
Mm.
only what I have always thought was right, when I hear other people's perspectives and I get to know them, as people.
Yeah.
Right. So yeah, thank you so much for that work. Well, I'm coming up to the end here because, again, I know that I have to let you go. And but is there anything else you would like to share, with, especially for me, I'm always thinking about, the people who may be either in the closet, or the people who don't feel
Mm.
like they can be leaders because of their sexuality, or how they're perceived, or their gender. Is there something, for you to say to them, more? I mean, you have been encouraging us, I think, this whole time, and but is there anything else you would like to say?
Yeah, I think that I think the world spends a lot of time trying to convince us that we're not good enough, that we're not smart enough, that we're not straight enough, that we're not, fill in the blank. And and I believe in a God who tells us something very, very differently. I I believe that as Christians, we serve and love a God who loves us just as we are and says we are enough. And that's what the world needs. The world needs people who are willing to stand up and show their authentic self and stand in the deepest conviction and knowledge that God loves us just as we are, at our most authentic. And you know, for folks who are living in the closet, look, I've been there. I am familiar with the closet. I've spent some time there. And sometimes when I go to places that don't feel safe, I go right back into that closet if it doesn't feel safe. And so I want to encourage you to find places that are safe and to build relationships with people who will hold you and care for you and give you the strength and the to be able to be out in more and more spaces. But I also like want to be clear that it's important to be in a place where it's safe. Um, and I think the final thing is, listen, there are so many young people who are yearning to see someone who looks like them and loves like them, who expresses their gender like them in positions of power, who want to see themselves reflected in the stories and books on the news, wherever they go, they are yearning, they are longing. In fact, they are full of deep sorrow because they don't see themselves reflected. And so it's imperative that those of us who are grown and gifted, who are queer and genderqueer and non-conforming and non-binary and trans and and all the things, the great things that we are as a rainbow, it's important, it's imperative, it will save lives. It will save lives when we step up and speak out as our authentic selves. And so um, I hope everybody who hears this will remember that we have a God who says we are enough and that we will walk out into the world being being powered by that knowledge.
Yes, thank you so much. And I thank you so much to be that person for many of us and many people who can see themselves, can see ourselves in you, thriving, making amazing decisions. I see so many videos of you, popping up. I just saw you were in a podcast or something about what's it called? Playing kickball. So just thank you so much for being yourself.
Yeah.
You are serious and with a big smile and wearing hats and wearing your collar. I mean, it's so great to see you. And I would just like to ask one last thing, either for you to bless us with a song, because I would love to hear you sing,
You're the singer on this
or,
call.
or with a blessing, please, as we leave.
Yeah, how about I offer this blessing? Wherever you are on your journey, wherever it is that you watch this, be filled with the great knowledge of all of God's love and be encouraged in knowing that there are communities of people all around this world who love you and yearn to know you. And most of all, walk away from this place knowing that God's blessings are always with you and be willing to share those blessings with whomever you encounter. Amen.